Now we want to review some of the setup requirements to accomplish the billing we've just reviewed. So one of the items is billing information. We also have billing rules maintenance, allocation methods compared to the billing rules, and we'll also talk about some different posting scenarios as well, and then we'll discuss the invoice format and then billing setup. The first requirement to be able to invoice a project is to set up billing information. Related to projects, we will have at least two kinds of projects. We'll probably have internal projects and billing projects. So we don't need billing information for every project. It would be only the projects we plan on invoicing. And the billing information screen will tell the Dynamics certain things that are important about invoicing that job. If I go to the billing information screen, we already looked at the screen related to that new project we've been processing through. Let's look at a little bit more detail some of the content on the screen. So we have a couple concepts related to billing that are important to understand. Related to jobs, our jobs may not be set up in the manner that we need to bill them. So we may want to track our jobs related to our costing, but maybe our billing scenario might vary a little bit different from the costing scenario we want to track. So we could have a situation where we have multiple projects, and these multiple projects need to build onto one invoice. And so we will use a bill with scenario for that type of content. Now, the other scenario we would have is we have a project that has a lot of tasks on it, and the customer says, we want certain tasks billed separately from other tasks. So in that scenario, we want to split the invoice up for one project onto multiple invoices. And then we'll have another scenario where we might say the customer says, we have this project, but we want to bill 10% to customer A and 90% to customer B. So we have varying scenarios that your customer may have requirements for that we can accommodate through the billing information screen. So if we have a scenario where we want to combine more than one project on an invoice, we can use a bill with project. So for instance, if I have project CO12300, maybe that's my primary billing project, but I have CO123001 and 123002 that I want to bill on the same project. So I simply come in here and I can say bill with CO12300 for this project, and I can do the same thing. So it's requiring a billing rule here. So now CO123001 will actually bill with CO123000. Now the other thing we can do is we can say we want to split up our billing. So we can say instead of choosing billing type standard, we can say customer split bill. So let's look and see what happens. So if I have standard here, you'll notice I have 4 tabs. But if I change my billing type to customer split bill, I have 5 tabs. It adds this 5th tab. Here I can choose, I want to bill 10% to customer C315, and then I want to bill the balance of it to customer C331. Actually, I'm going to bill 60% to that customer. And then the final portion I'm going to bill to C389, I'm going to bill 30%. So now I have 100% invoicing, but 10, 60, and 30 are going to be split for this specific job. Now, this is very important. If we use these kind of split bills or use this tab at all, then we must use auto invoice creation. So going back to the steps I gave you before, I said auto invoice creation is an optional step if you're just billing exactly how it comes from Allocator. However, if you're using this split bill customer tab here, what process splits it? So when auto allocator runs, all the transactions have already been brought over to Flexible Billings through the billing transaction load. So we have our entire list of invoicing items. Now we want to separate those onto different drafts. And so we established before that auto invoice creation will create the draft for us. If we have this split bill scenario, auto invoice creation is going to go that extra step and say, okay, if I have a $1,000 transaction line for labor, it's going to take that $1,000 labor line, and 10% of that will go to the first customer we establish. 60% of it'll create new lines. 10% will go to the first customer, 60 to the second, and 30 to the third. So we will end up with 3 separate transaction lines that are created on 3 different drafts. And that same process will happen for every record that's in the database. So it takes the lines and it proportions them. So once the auto invoice creation has been done and it's split them, then that we're committed to those transactions at that point. If that's wrong, we'd have to do some kind of correction to make the invoices correct through some kind of manual adjustment. So this is one scenario that we can have. I'm going to remove these lines so we can talk about a couple others. The other option under bill with is bill by task customer. So notice when I chose that, now my tab says bill by task. And now all my tasks are displayed, and I can come to this column and choose which customer is billed for each task. So I can say, well, I want the first 2 to be C300, and then this one to be C376, and so forth. And I can go through every one of those line items and associate a customer to them. I'm going to remove these for a second. Oh, it won't let me delete them after they exist, but that's okay. I'm just going to space out the customer, and I want to then come here and do bill by task group. So this is just a slightly variation of what we just saw. So the bill by task still shows up. The difference is, instead of linking it to a specific customer, I'm going to associate groups with each one of these. So maybe this task and this task are billed together, and that task. But then this task, I have group 2, and then maybe these are group 3. So they're not going to go to a separate customer, but they're just going to go to separate drafts at the time I run auto invoice creation. Again, this is allowing me to split them. Since they're not, the lines are not divided, the line, if it has $1,000 for a line, that line isn't going to be split across 3 things now. It just decides which draft it's going to show on. So this is how we can come back over to our auto invoice creation, or excuse me, invoice and adjustment maintenance screen. And you'll notice that for this in process record, we actually do have the ability to come and change the customer. So if you wanted to manually put these on separate drafts, you could unselect the 3rd line and the 4th line, save this draft as in process. Then I could create a second draft by just doing new and picking this project. And again, display my lines. It says I can't have more than 1 invoice, but if I displayed them, that's a setup choice I have made. But they would list the second 2 lines, and I could select them on a new draft. So there's a lot of flexibility as to what you can do in this screen. You can do some of these things manually, but this billing information setup screen allows you to be a little more proactive and have this split for you. I'm going to put this back to standard. So those are some really key information that we can use to powerfully change our invoices. We also have some other things that we can define on the billing information, specifically the invoice format. So when I printed the invoice, what format or how did that look when I printed it? And we can identify the approver and the biller. We also have the need for comments on our invoice sometimes. So we looked at the invoice specific text before, where we could identify and type in content for that specific invoice. But maybe there's something we want to show on the invoice header for every invoice of this project, some kind of special information that the customer requires for us to have them pay that invoice. Maybe there's something that needs to be on the footer, and this would apply to every invoice for this specific project. So in order to accomplish that, we have Invoice Comments tab, and so we can put an invoice header comment and an invoice footer comment, and this will show on every invoice that's created for this job. And there's also a project comment, which is in another section of the invoice that we can put as well. We still have this additional info tab, similar to what we saw on the project maintenance screen. There's hidden fields behind here that we can make visible and add more content if we want to track some just general information about this billing. The last tab is exceptions, and so the idea behind this is if we have a certain account that we don't want billing transactions to load, we can strip it out. So maybe if we have a certain employee that we don't want to be billed, we could say the employee could be omitted, and then you could say a Clark is not supposed to pull over, but instead of Andrew Clark, his ID is A001. So if we put exceptions to this, when billing transaction loads, it would not bring Andrew Clark's his time cards over to be billed. Not used a whole lot, because most of the time we handle this through Allocator. We just won't generate an Allocator record for this specific person. We'll come back to this screen. There was a couple other little fields we'll discuss, but those are the main things that we want to make sure we understand at this point. We want to now talk about the billing rules. And billing rules are related to how the invoice is going to post. So at the time the invoice posts, what accounts will be hit. So we know we already used Allocator to put it to Unbilled AR and Unbilled revenue. Now when the invoice posts, what accounts should be hit? So let's go look at how this happens. The bottom half of the screen is the rules for posting. You'll see that right here. The top half of the screen is actually used by billing transaction load. So when we run this process of billing transaction load, how does it know what accounts to go get? We tell it which project we want it to load, but we also want to tell it which accounts we want to load. Because if we come over to Analyzer, and I'm going to pull up that one project we've been looking at, we have accounts, quite a few different accounts here. We have unbilled expenses, we have revenue, unbilled work performed. So if we go back to the concept that we have both labor and revenue, we don't want the labor of $800 to pull over onto the invoice, because that would be, we would just be billing our costs at that point, and we wouldn't make any money. The same thing with the subcontract. We don't want that line to pull. We want the amount that was in unbilled work performed and unbilled expenses as well. So we have to make sure we're pulling the right information over to billing, or we're just going to simply accidentally be billing our costs. So if we go back to our billing transaction or billing rules, which I don't think I opened, this billing rules drives which accounts flow over. So you'll notice at the top half of the screen, this is saying when billing transaction load runs, what accounts am I looking for? Again, I'm looking for the unbilled expenses and unbilled work performed. I'm not looking for the labor or the costs. Now, but once it's over to billing, how am I going to post it? And you'll notice it's kind of odd looking, because we pull over unbilled labor and unbilled work performed and unbilled expenses, but yet we don't want all those to post the same. Maybe subcontracts we want to post to one account, maybe project or labor we want to post to a different account, expenses we want to post to a different revenue account. So we need to be able to differentiate how these post, and the way we do that is through the billing rules for posting. So even though this says unbilled expenses and unbilled work performed, down here it's instructing us when it's labor, post it to this account, when it's travel, post it to this account. If I go back to my invoice, that I pulled over, even though I pull unbilled labor and unbilled expenses, look at these accounts that it shows here: labor, materials, subcontract, travel. So it retained the account that it originated at. And now to make kind of a connection back to one of our previous sessions, It did that because on our allocation method, we told it over here to post in detail. So because these boxes were checked to say full detail, when Allocator ran, even though it created it to the account category called Unbilled Expenses, Unbilled Work Performed, it still retained the fact that it's labor, materials, subcontract, and travel. So that was why when we pulled it over here, it shows labor, materials, subcontract, and travel here. Now, so then that allows us, when we post the invoice, to post these differently. And we do have different postings. So you'll see here, labor is actually going to post to account 3030, where materials is going to post to account 3034. And subcontract is also 3030. Adds a lot of flexibility in what we can do with our invoice postings. So this is just a screenshot of some additional setup of how we can do our postings. Now you'll notice here we have a primary account and we have an adjustment account. It's easier to see in the screen in form view. So I'm going to put it in form view. It's the same line. It's just so it's easier to read. So the primary account is 3030. If I would type a line in, I'm making an adjustment to the invoice. That's going to go to account 3030. And then I'm going to post to these two offset accounts, and these are the unbilled AR and unbilled revenue. We'll come back and talk about those. I also have the ability to do masking. If you recall, in Allocator, we could do masking. So we could choose P's or S's or T's, saying pull from the project. If it's got P's on it, pull from the task. If it has T's, S means pull the sub-account of the source record. So we can do that same thing here. We can mask the postings of the sub-accounts. Now we come to the point where we want to kind of connect the dots between the allocation method and the billing rule. So this is, if you recall, when we did the allocation method, we had unbilled work performed, unbilled revenue. And then the GL account was account 1190 and 3032. So when the billing happens on the project, I needed to go to revenue, which is going to be the 3030 account, and then the offset to that will be the AR account that's on the customer. But I also needed to clear out these unbilled accounts that we put it into from Allocator. So we have these secondary postings called, so the post and the offset, these are called secondary postings, 3032 and 1190. That's how we're going to clear out our postings. So if you recall, we talked about two scenarios last time. We said we could go to unbilled AR and unbilled revenue, and then we could go clear it out of unbilled AR and unbilled revenue on the billing side. Or we could go to unbilled AR and directly to revenue via Allocator. So this slide kind of ties those two together, so we can look at scenario 1 and scenario 2. So scenario 1, where we went to unbilled AR and unbilled revenue, flexible billings will clear it out of unbilled AR and unbilled revenue through those secondary postings. And then we also get to the AR and revenue account. If we use scenario 2, where we went to unbilled AR and revenue, flexible billings, we need to set it will post it to AR and unbilled AR, but we would not set up any secondary postings for this scenario. The next thing we want to talk about is the invoice format. So at the time that I hit View Invoice, I'm going to close this. Get back to my invoice and adjustment maintenance screen. And I choose, I'm going to choose this project here. Actually, we'll do the one we've been working on. Choose this job. Nope, I want to use the first one. Okay, so if I pull up one of these drafts, these have already been posted, and they're using Invoice Format 1. And so I can have a format and an attachment. So if I need 2 reports to print, maybe I need a summary format and a detail format. When I generate or view this invoice, I will get the following format created. So you can see by this format I had 2, I'm going to zoom in, make it bigger. I have consultants here where it's listing the type of labor class they have, it lists the employee, lists the comments they had on that invoice, as well as the transaction date, their units, rate, and amount. Then down here, also on the travel side, I have detail as well. I can see who the expense report was for, the comments that they entered on their expense report, and then the amount. So this is a lot of detail that we see on this report. The way the detail is determined is through invoice format maintenance. So I said I used invoice format number 1. So I'm coming here and I'm pulling up invoice format number 1. So in order for me to even display labor on that invoice, I have to tell it that I want labor to be included on this invoice. So I'm just listing my account categories that I want to display on the invoice. Here I'm listing the section number, and the section number just controls the order. So when I display my invoice, what's the order that these are going to be listed? Do I want labor first, then subcontract, then travel, or do I want it in a different order? So by having these section numbers, I can control where they're located on the invoice. And I can actually use the same section number for more than one account. So you'll see labor and subcontractor put on the same section. So they would show together right below each other. Now this field here, the section type, controls the level of detail we see. So we saw invoice comments. So if I choose L7, you'll see there's a bunch of choices related to the invoice. And L7 says, I want to see the labor class, the employee, the date, and the comment. And if I come back to here, I do see the labor class, the employee, the date, and the comment, all from the invoice. So that is controlling this. Now, if I came back to this format and I chose L1, which just says show me the labor class, then I'll get the scenario that I have in this invoice format. Let me show you that one. View, make it bigger. So here, it's the same invoice that I printed, $3187.50. The only difference is that I've stripped out everything but the labor class. And so this labor class, I had chosen L1 for that, so the only thing it would show is the labor class and nothing else. So you can see we have quite a few variations of choices. We could do the labor class and the employee. We have a lot of choices. So this allows us to quickly tailor the invoice to match what you need without even modifying the crystal report. We have the same idea when it comes to travel. So travel, when I created this, it was A6, and A6 is account, employee, and comment. So if I come back to this invoice, I see account, travel, employee, and comment. But at the time, then I made another change to this and I chose A1, which is by account category. And this invoice here, in his example, when it's by account category, travel expenses and amount. So quite frequently, especially related time and material projects, we would have a situation where we want more detail on the time records, or less detail on the time, so just maybe the employee name and the type of labor class they have. But on the travel, quite frequently, they want those listed out, and so they can differentiate and understand what the individual costs were. So regardless of what scenario you need, we can accomplish it through here. Now, if you have other types of, let's say you didn't want contract value down here or the biller ID, these would be changes to the crystal report. So some of the things we can do through setup, such as these items, and then other things we would have to actually change the format of the report. The nice thing is that we can have pretty much a different report format and structure for every project that you have. We are not restricted to one common format. Now we want to take a look at the billing setup screen and how some of these transactions are controlled for the posting purposes. So if you recall, in Invoice and Adjustment Maintenance, we said that the retention, tax retention, and deposits tab has certain functionality related to it. The setup and the posting of those is controlled some in the billing setup screen. So if we look at, there's some other things here as well. We can identify the last batch number. We can identify a default for the % complete account category, which we'll talk about in the next session. Then also talk about sales tax as well. But we can identify if they put sales tax on the invoice, what account category will that post to? We can also allow to have more than one unposted invoice for a project. So this would allow, if you have instances where you are a type of invoice where you need the contract to date, the invoices I've been showing so far are just standard, this is my current billing, but there might be instances where you need the current billing and the contract to date. Well, in order for Dynamics to be able to properly calculate that contract to date, we can only have one invoice in process at a time so it knows what the previously invoiced items were. So if you need contract to date on your invoices, you would uncheck this box because we don't want to allow more than one invoice in process at a specific time. We can also control who the approver is and things like that. Here are some records or information related to posting deposits. So we talked about that's a choice on the drop down in the tax retention and deposits tab. If you use a deposit, this is the GL account and sub account it will post to. Same thing here. If you indicate a retention, this is the GL account and sub account it will post to. See, we have masking in here as well. We can choose if we want to include sales tax in the retention calculation. Then we have another option here which we haven't discussed a lot, but in previous modules we talked about the ability to automatically run financial transaction transfer, release my AP batch, FTT runs, and it shows up on the project. And then we said we also have the ability to automate Allocator. So as soon as that AP record gets to project, Allocator kicks in and creates my unbilled AR and unbilled revenue. We also have the ability to automatically load that record over to Billings if we want to. So this would allow us to bypass the billing transaction load process and pull that record directly into billing automatically. I'm less, I like auto allocator and I like financial transaction transfer being automated. Billing transaction load, it really depends on your company because we mentioned that you want to run that unbilled detail report at the end of the month to compare and reconcile your GL with. If you're auto loading billings as well, you're going to continue to have billings pulled over after the first of the month that might apply to this month. So you just want to be cautious in when and how you automatically load them into billings. But some clients it might work well for you. We also have the ability to include some other items on the invoice. So by default, we get the employee and we can get the units and the sub-account and things like that. But there might be some other things related to the source record that we want to bring over onto the invoice. So you can, if you say, oh, I want the invoice number from the AP voucher, you can check this, you can include this box. So when anything loads that's an AP voucher related, the invoice number will come over. Same thing if we're bringing stuff, the PO number can be brought over, those type of things. So this is just a way when it loads to bring more information than we normally would get on the loading. There's one other screen and setups that we can spend a couple minutes on. It's called the initial load for Billings history. This screen can be used if you're implementing Dynamics and you have prior billings that you want to include. Similar to what we talked about, if you use the contract to date column, so my current billings and then my contract to date billings also need to be on my invoice, I need somewhere to put those in because I don't want to put all my previous invoices in that I've already sent to the customer if I'm just starting to use Dynamics and then have to process them through the system. Rather, I'd like to be able to say, this is my previous invoiced amounts, and these amounts will be now included on my new invoices as well for my contract to date numbers. So that's the purpose of this screen. So if I had prior billings for CO111, I could come in here and I could say that for this project and this task, and for labor, for a different employee, for Andrew Clark, I had already $8,000 in invoices that I've already sent, and that was maybe 20 hours or something like that. So now if I had an invoice that included contract to date number, it would take whatever's on my invoices have been created within Dynamics and add this additional 8,000 to it. So it's a great way to get your system initialized and caught up without having to do a lot of backfilling of data related to previous invoices. Let's talk about inquiries and reporting. We talked about these a little bit before. One of the main reports we want to consider is the Unbilled detail report. So we already looked at the invoice and process report. The Unbilled detail report, I want to see what my output is here. I don't want it to go to file, so we'll change it here. My Unbilled detail report, this is a report that you will run every month, preferably before you close. And the reason we need to run this is we should have a list. If we have items on the project side that have not been billed yet, we need to be able to reconcile our unbilled AR on the GL side. So our Unbilled detail report is the mechanism with which we can reconcile our unbilled AR, because Allocator created unbilled AR when it ran, and that's a balance sheet item. So generally speaking, we want to make sure that balance is correct, and we need to be able to validate it to some type of number with supporting documents. So then this Unbilled detail report should give us a list of everything that's pulled into billing that still needs to be invoiced, which should also match the unbilled AR and GL. So when I run this Unbilled detail report, I'll see a list by project. And you see I have not billed that correcting time card or correcting invoice yet related to this project. So that's why this is still showing on my Unbilled detail report. I have not posted it yet. And then I have other projects that I have not billed as well. And so this report is important to run also at the end of the month to confirm, wait a second, why is this still on here? I thought we billed this. And so now you can also go back and review to see if you can give this to your project manager and see if these lines were supposed to be billed or why they're unbilled still. So this is a very important report to use every month for all your projects. We also can look at the billing transaction report. The billing transaction inquiry is a simple thing where you can see all the invoice lines that you've created and have brought over to flexible billing. So billing transaction inquiry, let's look at that same project we have been. So I can filter this by customer, employee, or vendor. If we come here, I'm going to pull up this project, and I could filter it further by account or things like that. But right now I'm just going to load everything. And here we can see all the data that's been loaded for this job. So I can see and I also see my corrections. So it has the draft number that it was associated with, as well as the invoice number. So for 92, that was my original invoice. and 93 is my reversing invoice, and then 93 is my actually going to be, I haven't created one for my posting invoice yet, so this third draft is still sitting out there. So this is the positive 3,000, negative 3,000, and then the positive 3,000 that's here. So any activity that you've ever had for this project can be shown. So how this report or this screen can help you is, how much have I billed for Andrew Clark or Zoe Clark on this job since the beginning of time? Well, where's the easiest place to find that? That's here, right? Because this is every record you have ever created by billing is in this screen. So you can tell any customer, this is how much I billed that for this employee, or this is how much materials I billed you, because we can come in here and we can look by account category. So if we want to see all the materials we've ever billed this customer, we can just pull up materials and we can do OK to load, and it will filter my list down to just my materials. I can also look to see, well, I only want to see what I've billed. So I'm loading, and it will get the 2 lines, because the third one has not been billed yet, or if I filter by unbilled, I know I still have that, it's selected on an invoice, so here it comes as a separate line item. So this is a great way to slice and dice. The other nice thing about this is, because it's a grid, we can export it to Excel if we want to. So if we need to look at this further, we just click in here, grid to Excel, and then we can review it as needed. We can also choose by vendor and employee, many different ways to use this screen. The next one we want to look at is Invoice Enquiry, and this is similar to the transaction detail inquiry, only instead we're looking at the invoice level. So the first one was the detail lines. Now we're looking at the high level, the invoice itself. So the project we've been reviewing, we have 3 potential invoices, right? The third one has not been sent yet. So I can see I've sent them 2. One was the original invoice here, and here's my credit memo. I have a third one that I'm going to send them, but it's not been sent yet. And then we can drill back to those documents, again, from the buttons in the bottom right here. Okay, key reports. We already talked about the unbilled detail report a couple times. It's very important. The invoice in process report, we already discussed that one too, where we can find all the drafts or items that haven't been posted yet. You'll also see that we have a couple other ones. We have what's called the Invoice Register report. This will give you all the GL postings that have been created by invoices that you've posted. And billing distribution is somewhat similar to that. It would give you the accounts as well, but just in a little different format. Highly recommend you use these reports. We have the same kind of item in billing transaction in a quick query. So we just said we can use billing transaction report to look at the individual line items here. This is nice because it adds filters and things. The same kind of information can be seen in quick query. So I'm coming back to my quick queries. And you'll notice there's just a couple quick queries currently for billings, but the billing transaction one is the same thing. I think you see more in this quick query than you can in the billing transaction screen. So if I right click and choose columns, you can see there's some items that are not visible in the grid that we saw that you can run in this screen. We also have similar to the Invoice Enquiry screen, these are all our existing drafts and our invoices that have been either created or processed. You'll notice on this invoice, there's one additional thing where it says it's been reversed or reversing. So you can see that this document's been reversed, and this one was created by the reversing process. So this is helpful because I don't think you can see that in another screen. Project invoice drafts, which we just looked at.